Monday arrived with an unusual quiet in the air, like the heavy pause before a thunderstorm. Marcia Lynn adjusted the collar of her cream blouse and checked her reflection in the polished glass wall of the elevator. Her auburn hair, neatly twisted into a low bun, framed a face that knew every inch of this building, from the mailroom to the top floor. For 12 years, she'd walked through the marble lobby of Redgrave International with a quiet pride. She wasn't just an executive assistant. She was Henry Redgrave's right hand. She'd organized mergers, handled crisis meetings, calmed boardroom tempers, and more than once stopped the collapse of entire divisions with a single timely intervention. Today, that stability was ending. She stepped out of the elevator and was immediately greeted by whispers. Colleagues leaned close, eyes darting like children at a funeral. Everyone knew what today meant. Henry Redgrave was officially stepping down, and his only son, Dylan Redgrave, was taking over. And nobody, absolutely nobody, knew what to expect from him. Marcia moved through the hushed floor toward the executive suite. As she passed the marketing team's section, she caught Clara Meyer's eye. The older woman, with her thick-rimmed glasses and decades of quiet loyalty, gave her a sympathetic look, mouthing, "Good luck." Marcia forced a polite smile. By 8:30 a.m., she was in the boardroom setting out dossiers for the transition meeting. Each seat had a leather portfolio, a bottle of mineral water, and a summary brief she had triple-checked the night before. The room smelled faintly of bergamot from the fresh arrangement she had requested for the occasion. The kind of detail Henry Redgrave had always appreciated. But it wasn't Henry who entered the room first. Dylan Redgrave strode in at 8:45, 15 minutes early and without acknowledging anyone in the hallway. He wore a tailored navy suit that screamed money and a smirk that dismissed everything and everyone beneath him. His phone was still in his hand as he entered, thumbs moving quickly. When he finally looked up, his gaze swept the room with the cold detachment of a landlord inspecting a property he intended to sell. "You must be Marcia," he said. She blinked. Must be? She had been introduced to him numerous times over the years, had even booked his business class flights back when he was still Delan from Harvard flying in for quarterly updates. But she didn't correct him. "Yes, I've prepared the transition documents for today's internal briefing. I'll walk you through the agenda." He raised a hand to silence her. "I don't do agendas, just results." Marcia paused, her hands still hovering over the presentation remote. Dylan sat down at the head of the table, legs crossed casually, radiating the kind of effortless arrogance born of money and immunity. Within minutes, the room filled with senior managers. Some she'd worked with for a decade, others were relatively new. Most wore expressions that wavered between curiosity and apprehension. The meeting began not with a warm handoff or a thank you to his father's team, but with a blunt declaration. Effective immediately, I'm restructuring. I'm not interested in preserving anyone's legacy. This company is bloated, sentimental. I want data, disruption, and performance. If you can't deliver that, I don't care how long you've been here. The room froze. Someone coughed awkwardly. Someone else typed, eyes wide. Marcia remained standing beside the screen, unsure whether to proceed or not. Dylan didn't look at her again. He continued talking, monologuing about efficiency, firing departments that were dead weight, mocking outdated practices. He referred to the HR division as a therapy unit and implied that the accounting team would be replaced with software by the end of Q2. When someone raised a hand to ask about continuity plans, Delan ignored it. When Clara tried to gently suggest preserving a few long-standing client protocols, he responded with a thin smile. "That's exactly the mindset I'm trying to kill." After an hour of this, the meeting ended as abruptly as it began. The managers filed out quietly, whispering in tight clusters. Marcia remained behind, gathering the untouched documents. As she was picking up the folders, Dylan looked up at her. "Why are you still here?" She blinked. "I'm your executive assistant." He tilted his head. "I don't use assistants. I manage my own calendar. Unless you're coding or closing deals, I suggest you prepare for reassignment." Marcia's fingers tightened on the folder. For the first time in her career, she had no response. No strategy. No control. He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out, leaving behind a silence that seemed to ring louder than any voice in the building. As the door slowly closed behind him, Marcia remained frozen. It was only her first morning under Deland Redgrave's leadership, but she already felt it, an invisible fracture in everything she had built. Not just in her role, but in the respect, structure, and rhythm that once defined the company. She knew the inner workings of this business like she knew her own home, but now it felt like a house being slowly burned from the top down. She returned to her desk in silence. All she could think of was Henry Redgrave's last words before leaving last Friday. "Take care of the company, Marcia. It's in good hands now." But Marcia now realized, with a sick twist in her gut, those hands were cold, careless, and about to destroy everything. The days that followed moved with a strange rhythm. Like a pendulum swinging slightly off beat, things at Redgrave International no longer felt precise, no longer felt right. The walls were the same, the desks the same, but the air had shifted. The quiet camaraderie between departments began to dissolve, replaced by tight smiles and hushed conversations behind closed doors. Dylan Redgrave had brought more than change. He had brought disruption. Not the kind the tech world celebrated, but the kind that disassembled trust. Marcia held on. She came in earlier, left later. She compiled reports that were no longer asked for, scheduled meetings that were dismissed with a single wave, and tried quietly to maintain order. She believed, foolishly perhaps, that professionalism would speak louder than arrogance. On a gray Thursday morning, the kind where the city seemed to breathe smoke instead of air, Marcia sat at her desk, finishing a comprehensive overview of client retention forecasts. She had spent the last 2 nights cross-referencing historical data and mapping out a 3-tier restructuring proposal. A small part of her believed that if Delon saw the effort, he might begin to understand the value of continuity, of people who knew the bones of the company. At 10:17 a.m., her phone buzzed. A message from Dylan's assistant. Ironically, someone he had hired last minute from outside. "Mr. Redgrave requests your presence in his office immediately." Marcia stood slowly. Her fingers smoothed her skirt out of habit. She knocked once, lightly, and entered. Dylan didn't look up. He was seated behind the desk, scrolling through his phone with one hand, a glass of what looked like green juice in the other. The office was colder than usual, the floor-to-ceiling windows letting in a steel-toned light that turned the room almost clinical. A sculpture of brushed iron sat where Henry's framed family photo used to be. "You wanted to see me?" Marcia asked, her voice even. Deland set the phone down and finally met her eyes. There was no hostility in his face, just complete disinterest. That somehow felt worse. "Yes, I'm restructuring the executive support system," he said flatly. "Your role is being dissolved." Marcia stood perfectly still. "Dissolved," she echoed, more to herself than to him. "You've been here a long time," he continued, "but I'm looking for people who align with my vision. Agile thinkers, digital native, risk tolerant. You're not that." The words didn't pierce, not at first. They just floated there between them like a fog. She blinked slowly. "So I'm being fired?" "It's not personal," he said, his tone so rehearsed it felt automated. "It's strategic." A bitter laugh rose in her throat, but she held it back. Her hands were clenched by her side. "You don't even know what I do." "I know enough," he shrugged. "You're efficient, but this company doesn't need efficiency. It needs reinvention." She wanted to speak. To say that she'd been here when the company nearly collapsed in 2013 and helped negotiate a merger no one else dared to touch. That she stayed when other executives left. That she memorized not just names, but their families, their stories. That she wasn't just an assistant, she was the spine of this place. But she said nothing. Because what was the point? Behind her, the door creaked. Clara Meyer had stepped inside, unaware. "Marcia, I need your sign-off on the..." She froze. Her eyes darted between them, immediately sensing the charge in the room. "She's letting go," Delon said, not even turning toward Clara. Clara's mouth opened. "You're what?" "I'm being fired," Marcia replied before Delon could speak again. Her voice was quiet, controlled. "No," Clara said sharply. "No, this is madness. You can't. She is the system. She runs." Dylan lifted a hand, cutting her off with a single movement. "Clara, I'll ask you to leave if you can't maintain boundaries." For a moment, Clara didn't move, her shoulders squared, eyes blazing. But then her gaze met Marcia's, and something unspoken passed between them. A farewell without a single word. Clara left. Dylan leaned back in his chair. "Your termination papers are ready. HR will process your severance. I've included a 2-month package as a courtesy." Marcia didn't take the file he slid across the desk. She stared at it, at the gray folder bearing her name in printed type, like a tombstone for her career. 12 years collapsed into one line of bureaucratic formality. With slow precision, she turned around and walked out. No tears. Not yet. The hall was quiet. Too quiet. People looked up as she passed, their eyes widening, then quickly turning away. No one said anything. No one dared. She walked to her desk and took only what she needed: her planner, a pen gifted by Henry Redgrave years ago, and a small ceramic cup from her first day at the company. Clara appeared beside her. No words, just a hand on her arm. "Don't let him define this moment," Clara whispered. "You built more than he'll ever understand." Marcia nodded once, and then she walked out. Past the same elevator she had stood in countless mornings. Past the receptionist who could barely look her in the eye. Past the company she had carried like a silent engine behind its polished glass and gold nameplates. Outside, the cold slapped her skin. She didn't cry. But something inside her, something she thought belonged to the company, shattered quietly. A fracture that wouldn't stay silent for long. He thought she was done, but he had just lit the fuse. The first few days passed like a blur through a fogged window. Marcia's body moved, woke up, dressed, made coffee, but her mind remained somewhere between disbelief and hollow silence. The rhythm of her days had been ripped away. There was no 6 a.m. alarm, no inbox filled with requests, no morning briefing or meeting reminders flashing across her screen. Her phone, once a symphony of vibrations and deadlines, was now silent, except for the occasional spam call or bank notification. The apartment, once a sanctuary after long days, now felt too quiet, too still. Bills arrived with ruthless punctuality: rent, insurance, utilities, and the spreadsheet she had made to track her savings now mocked her with numbers that only moved downward. She stared at the ceiling most nights, trying to silence the voice in her head whispering, "You were nothing more than a disposable cog." Clara called once, just to check in, but there was little she could say that didn't make Marcia feel like a ghost haunting her own former life. Worse was when she caught glimpses of Redgrave International on the news. New initiatives announced with flashy jargon and fake smiles. Dylan, in his perfectly tailored suits, appeared confident, decisive. And yet, something in his eyes betrayed him. A restlessness, a tension. By the second week, she had stopped opening the blinds. It wasn't until Sophie Adler stormed into her apartment that things finally cracked. "You smell like regret and instant noodles," Sophie declared as she shoved open the curtains and let the morning sun invade the room. She wore a leather jacket and a determined scowl, her fiery red curls bouncing with every movement. Marcia blinked at her from the couch. "Good to see you too?" Sophie sat on the edge of the coffee table, ignoring the empty takeout boxes. I know it hurts. I know what he did was a punch to the ribs. But if you keep lying here, you're gonna let him win. Marcia laughed dryly. He already won, Soph. He erased me, like I never existed. Sophie's tone softened. You didn't get erased. You got redirected. Marcia looked away. To what? Depression? Poverty? To something you should have done a long time ago. Sophie leaned in. Start your own damn thing. That pulled Marcia's attention back. What thing? I was an assistant. You were the brains behind that company, Sophie shot back. You knew their clients better than their marketing team. You knew the internal weaknesses they kept sweeping under the rug. You knew the workflows, the suppliers, the fail points. Hell, you probably knew when the janitor was going to retire. That doesn't mean I know how to run a business. You don't have to, at least not alone. I'm tech, your strategy. You give me direction, and I'll build the platform. Sophie leaned forward. Think about it. You said it yourself. Dylan's gutting Redgrave from the inside. You know where he's about to fall. What if you built the very thing he's too arrogant to protect? The silence between them hung heavy, then shifted. In that moment, something stirred in Marcia's chest. Not anger, not even ambition, but the faintest tremor of possibility. Meanwhile, across the city, Dylan stood in his corner office, surrounded by sleek glass and distant skyscrapers, unaware that his empire had begun to crack. One by one, senior managers were leaving, not with loud protest, but quiet resignation. Clients were withdrawing deals, citing instability in leadership. The staff turnover rate spiked, internal emails leaked, and Clara Meyer had begun documenting every questionable move in a private archive. But Dylan didn't see it, or rather, refused to. He doubled down, cutting departments, outsourcing core teams, replacing seasoned experts with younger, cheaper hires who smiled wide and said yes to everything. To him, Marcia was old DNA, a piece of an era he wanted buried. But he didn't realize yet, when you pull the wrong brick from the base of a tower, it doesn't fall right away. It waits, and then it crumbles. Back in her apartment, Marcia finally pulled out her laptop. Fingers hovered above the keys. She opened a blank document, titled it, Rebuild. She didn't know what the future would look like. But for the first time in weeks, she was thinking about it. Not as a victim, but as a builder. The first real step began not with a grand plan, but with a single shared Google Doc. Its title in bold, Rebuild 1.0. Marcia and Sophie met every afternoon in Sophie's small co-working space above a bookstore cafe. It smelled of paper, espresso, and early ambition. There, under buzzing pendant lights and surrounded by strangers with similar dreams, they began to outline a company not based on buzzwords or ego, but on the very inefficiencies Marcia had fought silently for years inside Redgrave International. What if we stopped trying to make something shiny? Marcia murmured one day, her gaze fixed on a whiteboard filled with crossed-out ideas, and instead make something that actually works. Sophie grinned. A revolutionary concept. The idea sharpened itself over countless evenings and cold noodle takeout. A digital infrastructure platform that would streamline internal workflows for mid to large companies, HR systems, project trackers, communication tools, internal reports, all in one adaptive, transparent interface. But not just software, culture-focused tools. Tools that let departments talk to each other in real time, where every manager could trace project responsibility and no one person was buried under corporate opacity. Marcia had seen firsthand how miscommunication killed performance, how bloated task lists, outdated approval hierarchies, and hidden internal conflicts led to wasted millions. And Redgrave, despite its gleaming facade, was bleeding from the inside. This isn't revenge, she said to Sophie one night, staring into her steaming mug of coffee. No, Sophie replied, it's a rescue, for everyone still stuck in what we left behind. Within 2 months, they had a working prototype. Sophie had coded the skeleton, clean UI, intuitive controls, high adaptability. Marcia handled the system logic, dashboard hierarchies, notification flows, compliance options. They called it Nexora, a name Sophie created to sound both futuristic and grounded. They didn't have an office. They worked from their apartments, local libraries, borrowed desks, and even park benches when the weather was forgiving. Then came the pitch deck. Marcia, who once built presentations for billion-dollar mergers, now stared at a bare-bones Google Slides file with trembling fingers. "Funny," she said to Sophie. "I've created decks that convinced boardrooms to gamble with millions, but this feels like standing naked." Sophie didn't laugh. "Because this time, it's yours." They applied for startup showcases, emailed angel investors, knocked on digital doors. Most replies were polite rejections. Some didn't reply at all, but one message stood out. Just a single line: "I'd like to meet. DW." It came from a private email domain, wolf.global. The signature, when opened, revealed a name Marcia vaguely remembered from business journals: Dominic Wolf, a venture capitalist known for backing companies that later disrupted entire industries. He was elusive, rarely gave interviews, and had a reputation for identifying not just businesses, but people who could change the game. They met at a rooftop lounge in downtown, the sun bleeding over mirrored glass as the city hummed far below. Dominic was tall, effortlessly elegant in a slate gray coat with a voice calm enough to lull anxiety. His eyes were sharp, not cruel, but discerning. He didn't ask the typical questions. He didn't want revenue projections or vanity metrics. Instead, he asked Marcia, "When you were fired, what was the first thing you thought?" She hesitated. "That I'd wasted 12 years of my life." He nodded slowly, then leaned in. "That's why you'll build something they never could, because you understand the cost of being ignored." He didn't write a check that day. Instead, he asked for access to the beta version of Nexora. A week later, he returned with a signed NDA, a modest investment contract, and an offer to connect them with 3 enterprise pilot clients through his network, companies struggling with the exact inefficiencies Marcia was solving. The seed was no longer just planted, it had sprouted. With Dominic's quiet backing and Sophie's relentless coding, Marcia found herself leading something real. Her voice mattered. Her instincts were trusted. She was no longer just reacting to orders. She was creating systems, guiding development teams, sitting across from department heads and helping them fix problems before they metastasized. One night, after closing their first minor partnership with a logistics company in Hamburg, Marcia walked home alone. The streets were quiet, wet with fresh rain. Her reflection followed her in puddles and glass doors. She remembered Dylan's voice. "You're not part of my vision." She smiled to herself, good, because he wasn't part of hers either. It started with a single email, short, formal, and devastating in its implications. To Mr. Dylan Redgrave, after careful consideration, we have decided to discontinue our 5-year partnership with Redgrave International, effective immediately. Please direct all final invoices and closing correspondence to our legal counsel. The sender, Minerva Tech, one of Redgrave's top 3 clients and a cornerstone of their quarterly projections. Dylan read it twice, blinking under the sharp light of his office. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing, only pushed back from his desk and closed the email without response. In his mind, it was a glitch, an overreaction, a warning shot, perhaps, nothing more. But the next week, 2 more contracts were suspended. One from a European logistics firm, citing strategic misalignment, the other from a longtime domestic partner who noted concerns over continuity and project oversight. Deland didn't see a pattern. He saw betrayal. Rather than pausing to assess, he doubled down, calling emergency meetings where he barked at department heads, demanding loyalty, insisting the company was on the edge of innovation. He dismissed concerns as weakness, slashed budgets for onboarding and client retention, and hired a high-cost rebranding firm to revive Redgrave's external image. The campaign, Hack Redgrave Reignited, launched with sleek visuals but no substance. Internally, things unraveled faster. Middle managers whispered in stairwells. Emails were sent, deleted, then resent after hours. Clara Meyer began logging odd activity in private, Delenn removing long-standing internal policy documents, replacing them with unclear directives, and overruling compliance reports. Teams operated without leadership. Projects fell into limbo. The Friday meetings, once a place of shared goals, became survival zones where everyone talked less and watched Delenn more, unsure whether he'd explode or simply ignore them. The HR floor, once a quiet hum of mediating voices and employee advocacy, now resembled a battlefield of exit interviews and resignation letters. It was around this time that Claude Bannister returned to the scene. A former rival of Henry Redgrave, Claude was a predator in the boardroom, charismatic, merciless, and patient. He had waited years for a crack in Redgrave's armor, and now he could smell blood. He began reaching out to Redgrave clients with special offers, proposing streamlined packages and stability in leadership, everything Delenn could no longer offer. His emails were charming, his calls more persuasive, and his offers perfectly timed to align with every withdrawal Redgrave suffered. One by one, former allies began to shift their loyalties. And all the while, Amelia Voss stood just outside the eye of the storm, frowning over seating arrangements and floral centerpieces. She was the daughter of a well-connected senator, and she didn't like bad press. Her wedding was set to be the social event of the quarter, an upscale affair at a vineyard in Tuscany, with a custom-designed gown and a guest list that included celebrities, politicians, and CEOs. But her groom? He was distracted, moody, distant. "You haven't picked the wine," she snapped one evening in their penthouse apartment. Delenn, still in his office attire, stared at a report filled with red flags and downward arrows. "What wine?" "For the wedding, Delenn," she said slowly, as though speaking to a child. "Or are you too busy playing CEO to remember that?" "I'm trying to save the company." She crossed her arms. "You mean the company you're burning from the inside?" That made him look up. She continued, coldly, "I've had 2 journalists call me this week, asking if Redgrave's collapsing. Do you realize how that reflects on me?" "It's not collapsing," he said through clenched teeth. "You fired your best asset, alienated the board, and now Claude Bannister is dancing on your front lawn," Amelia said, her voice sharp. "If you don't fix this, you can say goodbye to more than your clients." Delenn stood, pacing now. "They're overreacting. Everyone is. I'm modernizing. I'm changing the culture." "No," Amelia said. "You're isolating yourself and taking the rest of us down with you." She grabbed her bag and left that night, slamming the door without looking back. Delenn didn't stop her. He couldn't. He stood in the silence of their penthouse, surrounded by elegance, choking on the taste of failure that no designer furniture could mask. Back at Redgrave HQ, the tension in the air became tangible. More resignations trickled in. 2 senior developers, the marketing lead, and an entire client service team in Dubai. The elevator rides were silent. The break room became a ghost town. No one trusted the future anymore. In a nearby district, in a shared workspace lit by warm lamps and quiet determination, Nexora had begun signing clients. Marcia sat across from her second pilot company, a publishing network struggling with communication across departments. As she walked them through the dashboard and its solutions, their CEO leaned back and said, "Where were you 6 months ago?" "Fired," Marcia smiled. "But not anymore." In the distance, she didn't know yet how fast Redgrave was falling, but she didn't need to. She had stopped looking back. The cracks were no longer forming. They were spreading. And soon, everything Delenn built on sand would finally give way. There was no ribbon cutting, no confetti, no PR spectacle. The launch of Lindum, named from a quiet fusion of Lynn and Dominic, was as modest as it was deliberate. It began with an email blast to a curated list of mid-sized firms. It included a simple landing page, a 1-minute demo video, and an invitation to pilot the beta version of their internal productivity platform. No fanfare, just clarity. Marcia sat in Sophie's apartment the night they pressed send. Her heart beat louder than the hum of the fan spinning above. Her hands trembled, though she wouldn't admit it. Sophie, ever cool-headed behind her laptop, raised a brow. "There," she said. "Launched." "You didn't combust. That's a good sign." Marcia gave a tight smile. "Not yet." By the third day, they had their first response from Ainsworth Legal, a boutique law firm once aligned with Redgrave International, but had quietly ended their partnership 3 months prior. Their operations director wanted to know if Lindem's task delegation module could be customized to fit a 5-branch workflow. Marcia responded with a detailed answer within the hour. By week's end, they had 5 new client calls on the books. The real shift came when Dominic Wolfe took them to dinner at a quiet private lounge nestled inside a 5-star hotel. The kind of place where power was traded between sips of wine and casual laughs. "I believe in quiet beginnings," Dominic said, handing Marcia a list of names on embossed cardstock: CEOs, VCs, venture builders, digital transition specialists. "But I also believe in very loud waves once you've built your current." His smile was faint, almost private. "Let's make Lindem unignorable." What followed was a whirlwind Marcia never could have imagined in her days of printing contracts and refilling boardroom water pitchers. Investor meetings, software reviews, feedback loops that forced their small team to pivot quickly, adjust interfaces, refine communication tools. Sophie worked late into the nights, her eyes burning but her mind sharp. They hired 2 more part-time developers and a UX designer from Berlin who worked remotely but seemed to understand Marcia's vision from the first sketch. Then, one morning, it happened. Lindem trended, quietly but unmistakably, on a major product innovation forum. A user with tens of thousands of followers wrote, "Where the hell did Lindem come from? This is what internal tools should have looked like 5 years ago." That post alone brought 12,000 hits to their homepage in 2 hours. But as the light of Lindem began to burn brighter, so did the shadow of Redgrave grow darker. Marcia received an unexpected message late at night, an encrypted email from a private account. It was short, unsigned, but the voice behind it was unmistakable. "He's gutting everything. 6 more people are gone this week, including the entire Asia-Pacific analytics team. Morale is poison. Claude Bannister is circling procurement now. He's going to flip the Tokyo office next. Just thought you should know." Below the message, a name. Clara. Marcia stared at the screen in silence. In her chest, something stirred. Conflict, old loyalty, and something else. Not glee, but validation. She wasn't rooting for Redgrave's destruction, but she would no longer pretend she didn't understand its cause. Over the next few days, Clara sent more. Internal memos. Memos redacted by Dylan, then rewritten with inflated projections. Meeting transcripts where he claimed Lindem was a weak copycat built by a disgruntled ex-employee. Files showing client complaint volumes. Even footage from a staff town hall where Delan had raised his voice red-faced, blaming institutional laziness for the drop in numbers. Marcia never forwarded the files, never shared them. She didn't need to, because she already knew what they meant. Lindem wasn't growing out of vengeance. It was growing because the very roots of modern business had begun rejecting arrogance, rejecting shallow leadership, rejecting inherited thrones. Lindem was built from the pain of being overlooked, dismissed, silenced, and people recognized that pain, and they responded. By the end of the quarter, Lindem had onboarded 2 former Redgrave clients, 1 international retail chain, and 3 consulting firms, all through referrals, not advertising. Their platform was being used in 5 countries, with positive feedback loops generating new design iterations almost daily. The interface was lean, the results were clean, and more than anything, Marcia's name was finally being mentioned in rooms that once wouldn't let her through the door. Late one night, standing by the window of her modest new office, she watched the lights of the city blinking like tiny signals of fate. She whispered, not bitterly, but with quiet conviction, "You fired the wrong person, Dylan." And this time, she didn't look back. The launch was meant to be his crowning moment. Dylan had poured millions into it, months of marketing campaigns, celebrity endorsements, and flashy promo videos. The app, dubbed Redcom, was intended to be Redgrave International's answer to internal communication platforms like Slack and Teams. But Deland wanted more. He wanted disruption, dominance, and a legacy that bore his signature, not his father's. On launch day, the press was gathered in a pristine event space in downtown Manhattan. Giant screens hung overhead, showing slow-motion footage of bustling offices, smiling young professionals, and sleek UI mock-ups. Dylan walked on stage in a black turtleneck and navy blazer, mimicking every tech visionary he'd ever admired. His speech was scripted, polished, and painfully hollow. "We are not just launching a product," he declared. "We are redefining how businesses talk to themselves." The applause was polite. The room was full, but not warm. Redcom launched that evening. By sunrise, it was a disaster. The app was riddled with bugs. Users reported login issues, disappearing chats, repeated crashes, and in one high-profile case, a major logistics client lost an entire week's worth of team messages during a deadline-sensitive operation. A review on TechPulse called it a Frankenstein product built by people who didn't understand the problem they were solving. The story spread like wildfire. Headlines read, "Redgrave's Redcom, a $10 million flop. Boy CEO breaks the company he inherited." From boardroom to backfire, the rise and stall of Dylan Redgrave. The memes came next. Images of Dylan with exaggerated expressions captioned with mock CEO phrases. "We don't need user testing. I have instinct. Fire experience, higher vision." And in the quietest office of a quiet mansion on the Upper West Side, Henry Redgrave sat in front of his morning paper and closed it without a word. That afternoon, he visited the company. He didn't announce his arrival. The boardroom fell into a stiff silence when he walked in. Deland stood to greet him, half defensive, half desperate. Henry did not sit. "You ignored advice," Henry said softly. "You replaced proven systems with ambition and no structure. You fired the people who could have warned you, and now you expect a cleanup." Dylan's lips parted, but Henry raised a hand. "I built this company brick by brick, not to hand you glory, but to give you responsibility. If you can't carry that, step aside before the foundation crumbles entirely." He left before Dylan could say a word. That evening, Amelia Voss canceled their wedding tasting. She arrived at their apartment with a single overnight bag and no small talk. "You're toxic right now," she said, calm but sharp. "Every headline attaches your name to mine. Every investor that walks away from Redgrave, they're whispering my name too." "So that's what matters to you?" Dylan snapped. "Reputation? No. Survival." She turned to the door, heels clicking on the marble floor. "I didn't agree to marry a man who burns down his father's legacy and expects me to smile for the cameras." The door closed behind her. This time, she didn't slam it. For the next 2 weeks, the fallout continued. Investors withdrew funding for Redcom's second phase. Partner companies demanded refunds. Several board members began discussing emergency leadership reviews. Dylan panicked. He summoned department heads one by one, trying to find anyone to take the fall. He blamed IT for rollout instability, marketing for overhyping, even HR, bizarrely, for not screening loyal employees who leaked negative sentiment to the press. But no matter how many names he threw forward, the public had already decided. This wasn't a technical failure. It was a leadership failure. The spoiled boy CEO narrative had stuck, and now it colored every decision he made. Internally, his words no longer carried weight. People obeyed him, but without belief. Clara watched quietly from her desk, documenting. She had stayed only because she wanted to see how it ended, and it was ending faster than anyone expected. Dylan sat in his office on a Thursday evening, the city lights flickering beyond the glass. For the first time, he looked tired. Truly tired. Not the exhausted kind of a man working too hard, but the hollow kind of someone realizing he had built a stage without a script. In a folder beside him were all the resignation letters that had come in that week. 3 senior developers, 1 client success manager, 2 financial analysts, all gone, and each one was a hole in the ship he insisted wasn't sinking. He picked up his phone, scrolled past unread messages, paused over a news headline, Lindum named top emerging tech startup in organizational management. The article featured a photo of Marcia, smiling, confident, holding a demo tablet beside Dominic Wolfe. The caption read, "Built from corporate ashes, Lindum rises as a solution the old world forgot to build." Dylan closed the screen, threw the phone on the desk, and for the first time since taking the CEO chair, he was alone in silence, not by accident, but by consequence. The Global Tech Leadership Summit was held in a glass-wrapped convention center in downtown Chicago, where ambition hummed beneath every polished shoe and glinting lanyard. Banners of innovation draped from the ceilings like royalty. Logos of sponsors, some familiar, some newly ascendant, formed a shimmering mosaic of modern dominance. Marcia hadn't intended to attend. Her schedule had been overflowing with investor calls and user experience meetings. But Dominic Wolfe had insisted. "Sometimes," he said, handing her the pass with a knowing glint in his eye, "you don't go to be seen. You go so others remember they missed you." The first 2 hours of the summit moved as expected. Keynotes, panel talks, soft clinks of champagne in networking lounges. Lindum's booth sat modestly in the innovation wing. Clean, elegant, understated. A steady stream of interested execs stopped by, curious about the platform making quiet ripples in corporate circles. Sophie handled the demos with her usual dry charm, while Marcia observed with calm confidence, answering questions with the polish of someone who no longer needed to prove her worth. It was during a mid-afternoon panel on future internal systems that it happened. She spotted him. Dylan Redgrave, taller than she remembered, but thinner too. His tailored suit was impeccable, his hair still perfect, but the confidence he wore in the past had frayed. He walked with the stride of someone trying too hard to reclaim gravity. His badge read keynote presenter, but his name buzzed more in whispers than applause. The press had followed his failure, and the industry hadn't forgotten. He saw her halfway across the exhibition floor. Their eyes locked. There was a brief pause in the crowd, a flicker in time that only they seemed to notice. Then he approached. No greetings, just accusation. "I suppose this is what you wanted," Dylan said, voice low but edged. "Tear me down, build your little empire on my scraps." Marcia's face didn't change. "I didn't tear anything down, Dylan. You just didn't know how to build." He scoffed. "Come on. The timing. The clients you stole. The whisper campaigns. You've been engineering this from the start." Marcia raised a brow. "You fired me. Remember that? You said I didn't fit your vision. I left. Quietly. I rebuilt my life with what I knew. You're the one who burned the house down after throwing the architect out." He stepped closer, his voice tight. "You think you're better than me now?" "I don't need to be better," she replied, steady and direct. "I just had to stop following someone who didn't know where he was going." For a moment, his jaw tensed. People around them had started to notice the interaction. A few paused, half curious, half cautious. A camera flash flickered in the background. Even here, Dylan was still a name people watched, for the wrong reasons. Then another figure joined them, smooth and unhurried. Dominic Wolfe. He placed a hand lightly on Marcia's shoulder, his presence magnetic as ever. Everything all right here? Dylan's eyes narrowed. So it's true, he muttered. You're behind this. Dominic offered a quiet smile. Behind her? No, I backed her. That's different. She didn't need someone to control her. She just needed someone to believe she was already right. Dylan stared at him, baffled. Dominic continued, You thought you were building a legacy by cutting away the past. But legacies aren't inherited. They're earned. And sometimes the ones you step on are the ones who rise higher because of it. The silence that followed was deeper than the noise around them. Dylan looked at Marcia again, but now it was different. Not anger, not superiority. Something closer to disbelief, or maybe regret. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She simply nodded, then turned. As she walked away with Dominic beside her, someone nearby whispered, That's the Lindum founder. The rest of the afternoon was a blur of meetings, panels, and press requests. But one image lingered in Marcia's mind. Dylan, standing still in a moving crowd, fading quietly into the noise of a world that had already moved on without him. And for the first time, he finally looked small. It didn't happen overnight. It happened in layers, like the peeling of paint from a wall that no longer held together beneath the surface. Redgrave Inc., once a symbol of heritage and corporate excellence, began its final descent with a whisper. A single leaked memo appeared on a popular business watchdog site. Short, informal, and damning. It exposed an internal decision to manipulate client data in Redcom reports, masking failures with projected engagement numbers that had no real source. The document, marked confidential, bore Dylan Redgrave's initials at the bottom. The next morning, the stock took a 7-point dive. By midday, the leaks became a flood. Claude Bannister, the ever-patient shark, had bided his time perfectly. What no one had known was that Claude had moles, people who had left Redgrave silently and slipped under his wing, trading loyalty for clean exits and salaries. He released email chains between Dylan and marketing heads, outlining how to spin Redcom's disastrous feedback and silence critical reviews. Social media exploded. Within hours, Redgrave's scandal was trending. Dylan tried to control the damage. He summoned the PR team, then promptly yelled at them in front of junior staff. His eyes were ringed with insomnia. His voice cracked. But the world no longer listened to his version of things. The narrative had shifted, and he was no longer the storyteller. Investors pulled out next. The morning after Claude's leaks, 3 top venture backers issued a joint statement. In light of recent ethical concerns and continued financial volatility, we are terminating our support of Redgrave International effective immediately. 2 board members resigned before noon. The CFO submitted a brief but brutal email. I refuse to go down with a ship captained by ego. By the 3rd day, the press had staked out the Redgrave building. The revolving doors kept spinning, only in one direction, out. Employees clutched personal boxes. Executives avoided eye contact. Even the cleaning staff moved with nervous energy, unsure whether they were tidying a workspace or a tomb. Inside his corner office, Dylan stared at the headlines playing silently across the large wall-mounted screen. His reflection warped in the polished black glass. The headlines blurred into each other. Collapse of the House of Redgrave. The empire ends with a hashtag. Legacy lost. How nepotism killed a giant. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. The phone calls had stopped. The messages came only from Amelia, and even those had shifted in tone. I'm stepping away from the wedding. That was all she'd said. No apology. No explanation. Just a cold, clean break. Dylan hadn't answered. He had no strength left for argument. The final blow came quietly behind closed doors, where no one saw the raw sting, but Clara heard it. She stood near the boardroom when Henry Redgrave arrived unannounced. The older man moved slowly, with the posture of someone carrying the weight of a name that once meant something. Clara didn't hear the whole conversation, only fragments through the glass. Henry's voice, low and firm. You embarrassed the family. You destroyed trust I spent 40 years building. And you did it not because you failed, but because you refused to listen. Dylan tried to respond. His voice cracked with something that sounded like a plea. Henry's reply ended it. You're not Redgrave right now. You're just Dylan, and you need to fix yourself before you ever carry this name again. Then he left. No hug, no forgiveness, just silence trailing behind his measured steps. That night, Dylan sat alone in the once crowded CEO office. No assistants, no advisors, no fiancé, just the echo of a name, Redgrave, that no longer protected him. Outside, the company logo still glowed faintly above the building, but inside, the light had already gone out, and Dylan finally understood not what had collapsed, but who had collapsed. The rain was soft but steady as it fell across Manhattan, veiling the city in a thin mist that blurred even its sharpest edges. Marcia sat alone at a corner table of a discreet members-only lounge nestled within a brownstone building in Gramercy. She didn't order anything. She just waited, the quiet ticking of the antique wall clock filling the silence. At precisely 6 p.m., Henry Redgrave entered. He looked different from the man she remembered. Thinner, older, his tailored coat hanging a little looser at the shoulders, but his eyes were the same, sharp, calculating, and laced now with something unexpected. Regret. He removed his gloves, took the seat across from her, and for a moment said nothing. I wasn't sure you'd come, he said at last. Marcia gave a polite smile. Curiosity's a powerful thing. Henry's mouth twitched. Then let me skip pleasantries. He leaned in, both palms flat on the table. Redgrave Ink is crumbling. You know that. The board's fractured. Our top-tier clients are gone. The rest are one headline away from leaving. But the employees, hundreds of them, are still showing up, waiting for direction. Good people, hardworking, innocent in all this. Marcia listened without interrupting. Her expression was unreadable. I've had private talks with a few shareholders, Henry continued. They're willing to sell off non-core divisions, clean slate, but no one wants to touch Redgrave now. The name's toxic. He hesitated, then, except you. Silence stretched between them like a taut thread. Finally, Marcia tilted her head. You want me to buy your failure. I want you to save the people you once led, Henry said, voice lower now. They still remember you. They trust you. That's more than anyone can say for my son. The name hung in the air. Dylan, Marcia said slowly, tasting the word. Is he aware you're here? No, Henry answered. He wouldn't understand. Marcia leaned back, eyes steady. She folded her hands. You want me to acquire a limb of Redgrave to keep it alive? I'd control it. Clean house. Yes, she was quiet for a long moment. Then one condition. Henry's eyes narrowed. Dylan never steps foot near it again. He has no shares, no say, no seat, not even a symbolic role on a printed org chart. He's done. Henry studied her. Behind his quiet exterior, something shifted. Pride, perhaps, or a faint echo of shame. Then he nodded once. Agreed. Marcia's gaze didn't soften. He fired me like I was furniture. He dismissed every voice that didn't flatter him. He dismantled your legacy because he couldn't handle shadows bigger than his own. If I rebuild anything that still carries your name, it won't be to protect him. It'll be in spite of him. Henry exhaled slowly. Then we understand each other. They didn't shake hands. There was no contract signed that night, no public statement. Just an understanding sealed by shared history and quiet vengeance. 2 days later, news broke in business circles. Former executive Marcia Lynn acquires Redgrave East, set to rebuild core operations under new leadership. The article featured no mention of Delan, no comment from Henry, just a photo of Marcia standing alone in front of the East Division building, flanked by loyal former employees who had followed her from the wreckage. Sophie called her that evening. You just bought the heart of the company that tossed you out. Marcia smiled. No, I bought its soul. The heart stopped beating a long time ago. From a quiet hotel room uptown, Delon saw the news flash across his tablet screen. He didn't throw it, he didn't scream. He simply stared at the image of Marcia, poised, certain, still rising. And he realized that this time, he wasn't just losing power, he was being erased. The boardroom at Redgrave East was no longer what it once was. The long mahogany table remained, but the air had changed. The walls were bare of old awards and photographs, the gold-trimmed frames that once held the faces of past CEOs now gone. The room felt stripped, of pomp, of illusion, of pretense. It was no longer a chamber of power. It had become a place of reckoning. Marcia stood near the head of the table, calm, composed, dressed in quiet authority. Her navy blue suit held no logos, no silk lapels, only strength. Sophie sat beside her, flipping through acquisition documents, her hair pulled into a knot, eyes sharp. Across the room, shareholders murmured in low voices. Legal representatives lined one side. Clara Meyer, back at Marcia's side, watched everything unfold with quiet satisfaction. And then the door opened. Dylan Redgrave stepped in. He was thinner, older somehow, though barely a year had passed. His suit no longer hugged his frame. It hung slightly loose, like a borrowed skin. His eyes carried the exhaustion of a man who'd fought the world only to discover his worst enemy had always been the man in the mirror. The room fell quiet. He moved slowly toward the table, a file clutched in his hands. Inside it were the final documents, a complete transfer of assets and operational rights of Redgrave East to Lindum Holdings, irrevocable, unconditional, the final act. He looked at no one but Marcia. "I have them," he said softly. She nodded. "You may sit." He didn't. Instead, he placed the file on the table. He stood still for a moment, as though wrestling with something deeper than just embarrassment. Then, in a voice not quite steady, "I thought this would feel like defeat. I thought coming here, handing this over, would destroy whatever's left of me. But maybe this is the only thing that can save it." The room listened in silence. Delon's gaze remained fixed on Marcia. "I was arrogant. I thought legacy was something you wear like a badge, not something you earn with every decision, every failure. I ignored every warning, silenced every voice that didn't echo mine, including yours." He swallowed hard. "I ruined what my father built. I hurt people who gave everything to this company. And I dismissed you, the one person who might have helped me prevent it all. I see that now. Too late, maybe, but I see it." A long pause. "I'm sorry, Marcia." The words didn't echo. They sank, heavy, real. Marcia didn't respond immediately. She let the silence stretch, not to make him suffer, but because truth deserved time. She stepped forward, picked up the file, and flipped through the pages. Everything was in order, clean, final. When she looked up, her expression was calm, her voice even. "I accept your apology." Dylan looked up, eyes blinking with a flicker of hope. "But not for reconciliation," she added. "Only for closure." He nodded, absorbing the blow without protest. "You asked me to leave once," she said. "You thought removing me would protect your vision. What you didn't realize is, I was the vision, the one that made this place worth coming to every morning, the one people trusted when the lights dimmed." She took a breath. "You didn't just fire me, Dylan. You burned a bridge with every step. I didn't build Lindum to hurt you. I built it to prove that I didn't need under anyone's shadow to shine." Another silence. This one fuller. Final. Deland lowered his eyes. "I know." He turned to leave, his posture no longer that of a CEO, nor a man trying to pretend he still was one. Just a man, worn, flawed, humbled. As he reached the door, he paused once more. "For what it's worth, I hope you build something better than we ever did." Marcia didn't respond. She didn't need to. As the door clicked shut behind him, the board turned to her, awaiting instruction. The papers were signed. The past had been handed over. She looked out the tall window at the city pulsing beneath a sky of steel and sun. The company that once threw her out was now hers. But she didn't feel vengeance, only peace. and the weight of every moment had brought her here, not for revenge, but for redemption, hers, not his. The rebranding was not a spectacle. It was a statement. Gone were the towering gold letters of Redgrave East, once etched above the glass entrance like a royal decree. In their place, under a quiet gray morning sky, workers affixed a sleek new sign, Linmar Strategics Bold, Minimal, Clean. The name was a fusion, Lynn from Marcia Lynn, and Mar drawn from her late mother's name, Maribel, whose quiet strength had shaped her long before boardrooms and balance sheets had ever tried. As the final panel slid into place, Marcia stood beneath it, hands tucked into the pockets of her tailored coat. Her reflection shimmered faintly in the glass doors, no longer the forgotten assistant who had once slipped into this building with coffee in hand and silence in her step. She stood taller now, straighter, not out of pride, but belonging. Inside, the building buzzed again, but differently. There was laughter in the halls, greetings that weren't forced, eyes that didn't flinch at open doors. Former employees who had returned under the new banner walked through with hope instead of caution. Clara oversaw onboarding with a purpose she hadn't felt in years. HR policies were rewritten from scratch. Office walls were repainted in soft neutrals. The private office Marcia now used was minimal, sunlit, and always had its door open. On the first Monday under the new name, the team gathered in the atrium for an informal welcome. Marcia didn't prepare a speech. She didn't stand on a stage. She simply walked to the front and said, "This isn't a rebirth. It's a repair of what work should feel like, of what trust can still mean." There was a long pause before applause started, and when it did, it wasn't explosive. It was warm, sustained, genuine. Later that evening, a small celebration was held on the rooftop. The skyline glowed beyond them like a city reborn. A modest gathering, just her closest team, a few new department heads, and those who had stayed through the storm. Sophie clinked her glass with Marcia's. "Remember when you were too scared to open your laptop?" Marcia laughed. "You mean when I was surviving off vending machine ramen and self-pity?" Sophie smiled. "That was 3,000 users ago." Dominic Wolfe arrived just as the champagne was being passed around. As always, he looked untouched by stress, but there was pride in his gaze that he rarely showed. He walked to Marcia with a glass in hand. "To Linmar," he said, lifting his flute. "Not just a name, a reminder that being underestimated is sometimes the greatest gift of all." They toasted. The wind lifted slightly, tugging at Marcia's blazer, as if the sky itself was shifting in acknowledgement. Clara joined them and whispered, "You turned something broken into something people want to be part of. That's not leadership. That's legacy." Marcia didn't respond right away. She looked around, at the smiles, at the peace, at the rebuilding that came not from revenge, but resolve. At Sophie, who had believed in her before she could believe in herself. At Dominic, who offered resources but never strings. At the people who now called her ma'am, not out of hierarchy, but respect. And then she said quietly, "I wasn't fired. I was freed." Later that night, alone in her new office, she stared at the one item she had placed deliberately on the shelf. A small ceramic cup, the same one she had taken with her on the day Delan dismissed her. It sat there now, unbroken, holding pens like it had once held memories. She smiled. She had once been the assistant no one saw. Now, she was the woman they couldn't ignore. And from this moment on, she would no longer walk into rooms wondering if she belonged. She would build the rooms herself.